Welcome, everybody.
Do I have to press continue?
Oh, yes, you can press continue, but
Not necessary.
yeah, either way. Welcome, everybody. We'll be starting in a little less than a minute. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our program on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm an educator at the museum. And this early afternoon, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Gerda Seifer, Holocaust survivor from Poland, who will share her story with you. And afterwards, you will be able to ask her questions using the Q&A box on the Zoom. Before we get started, just a few quick words about our museum. Our museum was founded in the early 1960s by a group of Holocaust survivors who wanted to make sure that the world would always have a place to remember and learn from this part of our history. And they always had a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Our museum is still able to do this on a regular basis, thanks largely to our survivor community who speaks and shares their stories on a regular basis, like Gerda. And so we're so grateful to have Gerda and other survivors in our community who were able to carry forward the mission of the survivors who founded our museum. Furthermore, I am pleased to announce that our museum is now open to the public in a limited capacity. And for more information on how to reserve a space to see the museum, you can visit our website, holocaustmuseumla.org, and you can find information there on how to come visit the museum in person. For the time being, we're doing our talks on Zoom, and we will be doing our Holocaust survivor talks on Fridays at 11 o'clock. And we'll be doing that throughout the rest of the summer. So Gerda, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your story with us. And you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Michael, for introducing me. I'm a Holocaust survivor from Poland. My name is Gerda Seifer, S-E-I-F-E-R. And I was born in a town called Przemysl. I lived a very nice childhood before the war started in 1939. I was an only child, had wonderful parents, intelligent and generous parents, and my life was just busy with schoolwork, going to school vacations, and doing my homework. Everything has changed practically overnight as September 1st came up in 1939 and the Germans attacked Poland. And from that moment on, for the next 5 years, my life turned upside down. I grew up overnight and became an adult almost, trying to think for myself and know how to answer any questions that were asked of me. I'm not going to go too much about the occupation right now because in eastern Poland, where my city was, that area was occupied by the Germans for the first few weeks of occupation. Then the Russians entered for the next year and a half, and that was another kind of life under the communism, which we weren't used to. And then the Germans, who signed the Pact of Non-Aggression with Stalin, declared war and attacked Russia. Hitler was determined to get to Moscow before the winter of 1941 set in. Luckily, he didn't get to achieve his wishes, but it was a terrible war with millions of people being killed. Some people were killed because they were in the army, because they were the enemies of the Germans. But many Jews were killed simply because they were Jewish, and Hitler wanted to eliminate the whole Jewish race. And Jews were the only people who had no country. For centuries, they prayed to eventually be in Jerusalem, but that did not happen till much, much later on. We had no idea what Hitler had in mind for us until afterwards. And it is very interesting to mention that about 13 years ago, I started with a workshop. I planned and started a workshop for teachers at Long Beach State University because I found out that most teachers in whose classes I spoke to their students really didn't know much about the Holocaust. And so I spoke with Professor Blotinger from Long Beach State University and a couple of other professors. We raised money to have a permanent workshop every year in the summertime, lasting a whole week, to teach the teachers of junior and senior high school how to teach and what to teach about the Holocaust. Read more books, learn more history. Each year, the Holocaust workshop has a different topic, and each year I participate in the class as well. It was very offensive to me this last year that Professor Blutinger sent me an email saying, we're thinking of doing the topic of denying Holocaust. I found it like it was really against me. How can you talk about denying Holocaust when I am a Holocaust survivor, when I know what happened, when I lost my whole family out of 38 people, only 2 people survived in our family, and I was one of the 2. The other person was a cousin of mine who was in a concentration camp at Auschwitz and Buchenwald. So how can you discuss denying Holocaust? But as we talked more about it, it seems that a lot of young people, and maybe some adult people, who read all these lies about denying the Holocaust and actually believe in that because that's all they ever heard. And so we finally decided that that subject was necessary to discuss it with the teachers this year in our workshop. There are very few survivors left now. And once we are all gone, who is going to say that the Holocaust actually happened? Who can prove that the Holocaust existed? The Germans were determined, well, not just them, but that Hitler and the Nazis were determined to eliminate all the Jews from Europe, at least. We had no idea this was happening while we lived in Poland under the German occupation, because it has never been clearly stated, you are going to go to the concentration camp and there you'll be worked to death, starved, and those who can't work will be gassed immediately and burned, and their bodies will be burned. We had no idea that this was going on. And so when the Germans came to Poland and said they were rounding up Jews to send them to different areas, we honestly believed we were going to be sent to some other working area where they would give us necessary work. What we did not know was that people who were rounded up were packed into the railroad trucks, into the trains, animal trains, and sent to concentration camps where they were taken off the train. Many of them who were older or sickly or unable to work were put in one group and immediately sent to the gas chambers. And the others, those who were younger and stronger, were put to work, fed very little food. Many of them died of starvation. Many of them died of disease and lack of energy, lack of food. And very few actually survived. Approximately 6 million Jews were murdered. And we who lived in the ghettos, we actually didn't know this was happening. My father had a good job. He was making cloth for the German soldiers' uniforms. And therefore, he was what we call a useful Jew. He went out of the ghetto every morning in a formation of 5 people in a row. He was managed to hear some news from the outside world. No one was allowed to have a radio. That was forbidden. And if they found that you had a radio, you would be shot for disobeying the order. So whatever my father could find outside, he brought the news to the ghetto. My mother and I did not work. There was no such a job for us to work. With us also lived my younger cousin, Richard, who was younger than I was. I was 14 at the time. He was, I think, about 12. He became an orphan. He lived with his mother and with us. His father was sent to Russia by the Russian occupation earlier on. And one day, his mother, who went to stand in line to get bread for everybody's ration cards, never came home. When my father returned home from work, he went to the police to inquire what happened to my aunt and was told, don't worry, she'll be home tomorrow. We probably sent her to some work. But my Aunt Helen never came back. So Richard was living with us as an orphan. There were actions, what they call in German Aktionen, rounding up Jews, those who were not needed, who did not have work, who should be got rid of. My father wanted to hide me and save me. And so he found a woman who used to be our neighbor before we were moved to the ghetto. And she was willing to hide me for money, even though hiding Jews was very dangerous. And if you were found hiding Jews, you, even if though you were not Jewish, you would be shot or sometimes hung on the street just to show everybody else that if you help Jews, that's what will end with to happen to you. You'll be hung on the street. So one night when my father came home, he whispered to me, Gerda, pack a few little things in a bag. You're going into hiding. There was no question to ask, why am I going where am I going, or anything. There was no time and no time for discussion. This was a given. I packed my little bag with toiletries, said goodbye to my mother, hugging her and kissing her, and said, Mommy, please hide. And she said, yes, I will. And I left the apartment where the room where we lived in the ghetto. The woman waited for me, and she and I walked quickly on the street without talking to each other. She brought me to her apartment building. It was a large apartment building. And she took me straight down to the cellar, her cellar, this one cubicle that belonged to her apartment. She sat me on a wooden box. It was pitch black there with the dirty floor at the bottom. There was no wooden floor at all. The cellar was used for each apartment to store your wood or coal during the war, to refill your fire, also to put in jars that you made in the summertime of jams and marmalades and vegetables to prepare for the winter. But this was summer. This was end of June, beginning of July. The cellar was quite empty. The shelves were empty. And it was about 4 feet by 6 cubicle with tiny little light shining through the little window up above or on the ceiling. The little window was used for opening to push coal or wood down when it was being delivered for the winter time. So that's all I could see was just a little tiny spot of light shining into showing a little bit of light. The woman who hid me said, be quiet, don't make much noise because nobody knows you're hiding here. Here is a match and a candle if you need the light, but try not to use it often. Be quiet and I'll see you tomorrow morning and bring you some breakfast. And she left. I'm sitting on that wooden box and thinking, what's happening in this world while I'm staying here in this empty place? And there's nothing I know but what I can think or imagine. How is my mother and father doing? How is Richard doing? What's happening in the ghetto? And then I think of all the good times I had before the war, when I went to school, when I had friends, when I went on a vacation, when I studied, all the good times, all the songs I knew, all the movies I saw. I'm just thinking of my life before the war. It was a wonderful life for a young, innocent girl. The woman brought me little breakfast every morning, and if I asked her what was happening in the ghetto, did she know? She would say, I think everything is okay, and she would just leave, keep quiet. Days went on, and I was like flowing in the midair. After a while, you stop thinking of all the past things. There's no more to think about. And all you really want is to see a little bit of sunshine, to be able to move around, and which something you cannot do. Uh, Days and days went by in hiding, and eventually one day I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand being cooped up in that little tiny cubicle all alone. And I decided to get out. I took a few steps, opened the gate of the cellar, walked up a few steps, and before I knew, I was standing in the middle of the street. It was very quiet there. Lucky for me, no one was around seeing me standing there smack in the middle of the street. I felt so stupid standing there, not knowing what to do or where to go. I just stood there. But the sun shining on my shoulders was so wonderful because I was starved of seeing the light for several weeks. The woman who was hiding me lived on a ground floor, and she happened to look through the window when she saw me standing in the middle of the street. She ran out of her apartment, looked both ways to make sure that no one was seeing her, ran up to me, took me by my arm and whispered, "What do you think you're doing? You're crazy? You're going to get killed. You're going to get us both killed." And I remember saying, I don't care. I don't care. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. She took me in to her kitchen, made me some tea, and convinced me to go back into hiding. All in all, I stayed in that cellar for 6 weeks. And eventually one day she came over and said, "Your father sent for you. It is safe to go back to the ghetto." As we walked down the street, walking in a very quick clip, I kept saying, "How's my mother? How's my mother?" And she kept saying, "She's fine, she's fine." She wouldn't talk. I somehow felt that there was something wrong with her answer. And when we got back to the ghetto, I walked in there and my daddy was waiting for me, put his arm around me, and I said, Daddy, where's mother?" He sat me down on the bed because we had no chairs there. And he had to tell me what I didn't want to hear. Evidently, he sent my cousin Richard into hiding, just as he sent me. But Richard was afraid to stay in hiding and ran back to the ghetto. My mother would have hidden alone, but she could not take him with her. So she decided to stay in the ghetto with Richard. She basically sacrificed her life for him because she and Richard were both rounded up by the Nazis and taken away from the ghetto. I never saw my mother again. My mother was one of the most unusual, wonderful people I known in my life. She did everything right. She was a very generous and intelligent and well-educated lady. A wonderful woman, a wonderful wife, and a wonderful mother. And I never saw her again. Later on, I realized that the shock of losing my mother caused me to forget, lose my memory. But I didn't know that at the time. My father went to work every morning because he had to. I stayed in the ghetto, not knowing what I was doing. I do remember that my father would come home every night, but what I did during the day, I have no idea. Can't remember at all, not to this day. My father was desperately trying to find someone who could hide me and to save my life. He was still working because he was still necessary. A, a woman in the ghetto told my daddy, I know a Polish woman whom I asked to hide my son. She would not take him, but she said she would take a girl. If I cannot save my boy, perhaps you can save your daughter. And so my father got in touch with this woman. Her name was Janina. John promised, offered her certain pay for taking me. She gave me her child's birth certificate. She had an illegitimate little girl who died in infancy. Our age would have corresponded had she lived, and I became that girl. I went to live with her. My name changed to Alicia. That was the girl's name. I had to call this woman mom. Imagine calling her only a few weeks after losing your own mother. To have to call this strange woman mother. It was so difficult for me to do it, and yet I had to do it. And I started living as a different person altogether. I lived with this woman all the rest of the war years. I was her slave. I was her supposed stepdaughter. I was her cook. I was her nurse. She had another illegitimate baby, and I had to take care of him, a little baby Andrew. She also had three other children. The two boys were teenagers, a little younger than I was, but they were all old enough to know that they must not let anyone know that I'm not their real sister, that I'm Jewish. The little girl, who's about 4 years old, Sesha, she was told that I was her older sister who lived with our family in a different city. But now that mother needed me badly, I came to help mother. I never had siblings, and all of a sudden I have to take care of baby and older children, cook, wash the laundry, clean, do everything while mother went to work. Otherwise, they would be starving. My father paid for me every month while he was working. One day, my daddy called the boys, the two boys who were her sons, and asked one of the boys to bring me to the factory where daddy was working. When we got there, he went to a little room which was empty, took me in there, and told me that he was going to leave the ghetto when it was being liquidated and go to Germany on false papers. My father looked very Germanic, with blue eyes, rosy cheeks, spoke perfect German, and he felt he could survive in Germany better than he could survive in Poland. He said he would not see me again, that I should be a brave girl, and when the war ends, we will meet again. We kissed, and I left my father, not knowing it then, but that was the last time I saw my daddy alive. The war went on, and every day was gave us a different difficulty. We had, for instance, neighbors. One of the neighbors would ask my so-called mother and tell her, you know, she doesn't look like you. How come? There were people like that neighbor who were suspicious, perhaps, that I may not be her real daughter and would report me to the police. But this woman was smart enough and said, well, she's illegitimate. She looked like her father who died. And that was a good excuse, the right kind of excuse. But on another occasion, this woman said to her, I watched Alice wring the laundry when she was doing the laundry. And she wring the laundry like a Jew. Now, how does a Jew wring a laundry any different than anyone else? You're either right-handed or left-handed, and that's the only difference there is. I don't know what she told her, but this woman was obviously trying to figure out if she might be right that I'm not her real daughter and report me to the police, knowing that if she reported me and if they found out that I was actually Jewish, that the whole family would have been shot. This neighbor was willing to report me and get everyone shot just to have one less Jew in this world. A young girl, innocent girl, killed. The war ended. And my mother, my so-called mother, she wanted me to stay with her, continue being her slave. Well, I wanted to get to school. I lost 5 years of important years of schooling. I wanted to get some freedom and get out of her clutches. But it was very difficult because she was planning to keep me forever as her servant. I was becoming very depressed, not knowing what to do, because I did not want to stay with her anymore. I wanted so badly to get educated, finish my school, and live like a free person. Her husband, who was originally prisoner of war in Germany, was allowed to come home. And he was a very decent and nice man. He would help me by giving me money for stamps to mail letter to England to my relatives. My father's sister, who survived the war by leaving Germany in the nick of time with her family, and they went to England. They lived in Munich in Germany, and they sent their oldest son to university in London, and on the morning of the pre-war, they left to supposedly visit him in England, but they never returned back to Germany, and that's how they saved their life. A friend of mine, a friend of my parents actually, who lost her daughter during the war, a daughter the same age as I was, sent me a letter with money telling me that she would like me to come and live with her, that she will take care of me and replace her daughter with me. My so-called mother opened my letter before I had a chance to open it to see what was in it, and quickly took the money sent for the railroad ticket and said, "Can I borrow it?" And I didn't dare to say no. I wanted to leave her so badly, but she said, "You cannot leave me until I find a replacement." Weeks and weeks went by, and of course, she never found a replacement, because who else would work for her for nothing, living in a bombed-out house in one room with 6 other people? I knew the situation, but I pretended that she was looking for help. I was almost ready to commit suicide. My life was miserable, hopeless, and I didn't want to go on like that, living like that any longer. But one day I talked to myself, because that's the only person I could talk to make any sense, and said to myself, "Your fathers saved you so that you could live after the war. And now that the war is over, you want to commit suicide? What kind of, it doesn't make any sense. Gather enough courage, tell this woman you need your money for the train ticket, the money she borrowed, and leave her place." And so when she came home from work that day, it was in 1946, beginning in 1946. When she came home from work, I told her, "I need my money for the ticket. Will you please give it to me? I have to leave today." She was furious with me. Of course she was. She didn't expect me to ever leave her. But she left the apartment to go and borrow money from her brother, who lived in the next apartment. When she left, her husband came up to me and raised his finger and whispered, "Listen, you got to go now, because if you don't leave today, you will never leave her." He gave me that encouragement which I really needed. And so when my so-called mother came with the money for the ticket, I took the money and I left her immediately. It was evening in January or February of 1946. The railroad station was crowded with people. There was no order. The whole country was in an uproar. It was communist, and no decent government, nothing was happening. I don't know how I found out which train was actually going to the city where my friend, the lady lived who wanted to adopt me or to take me in. The train was loaded with people to that extent that there was no room to stand in a corridor even. I went from one track to another, from one train to another, and every place was filled with people. You couldn't even stand in a corridor. And I was standing on the steps, outside steps of the railroad, holding on to the door, when the door suddenly was closed and the train started moving slowly out of the station. I held on to the outside gate door handle, and that's how I started going faster and faster and faster. It was freezing, the wind was blowing through me. My hand was practically glued to the metal handle, and that's how I traveled for the longest time until the train finally reached another station. A few people came out of the train, and I was able to go in and sit down actually on a seat. I was not going to go back again to stay with that woman who was my so-called mother. Sunday morning, we arrived in the city, and I started looking for my friend's apartment building. It took me 3 tries before I finally found the right apartment address. I walked into this very big, large, lovely apartment building, climbed the stairs, hoping, with my heart beating, hoping that I found the right person. As she opened the door, she looked at me and cried, "Gerda, my poor child." She held me and kissed me and then said, "Would you like to have a bath?" Would I like to have a bath? I was full of lice in my head, in my clothing. I haven't had a bath for 3 years. But she had this nice hot bath waiting for me. And I worried, what am I going to do with my clothing? It's full of lice. You can't put it back on, otherwise you'll never get rid of lice. But my friend knew better than I knew. And I never saw my clothing again. Once I got out of the bathtub, her clothing was ready for me to put on. And that's how I made the change from living with this Polish woman going back to a friend of my parents. I'm going to end this quickly because our time is getting shorter. I eventually went to England to stay with my relatives in Leeds. I learned English. I started nurses training, and after 3 years and 3 months, graduated as a registered nurse. In the meantime, I found out my cousin who survived the war, who is now living in New York, and he was able to get a visa for me to come to America. And in 1951, in July of 1951, I came to United States, a place I want to come for so long, and now I was in America. I always wanted to live in America and never thought I would ever be able to. It was like today talking about flying to the moon. But then I arrived one day, and my cousin, who survived the war, he met me at the ship and took me to Brooklyn, where I lived for a few months when I first came. Life wasn't easy. I had to, America did not recognize my license, my nursing license. I had to take extra examinations, extra training, and extra exams in order to receive a New York State license. But I did everything I had to do. There was nothing too much for me. I was so thrilled to live in the United States. I later went to work in Manhattan. I met my husband there, who was a doctor in training at Mount Sinai Hospital. And in 1955, we were married, left New York, and went to live in Boston for a year where he took another year of training. Eventually, we came to California again for his last year of training. We were going to stay in New York, in California, for 1 year only. However, we never left Long Beach. We've been living there ever since there. Our 3 children were born there, and they're living here as well. Since the early 70s, I started lecturing in schools about the Holocaust. I've been lecturing whenever I'm invited to speak to any group of people, any students, anywhere in the United States. I have spoken in England, I have spoken in Israel, I have spoken in Poland, and of course I have spoken in America many, 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 many times. So today, being told to talk about denying Holocaust is very difficult for me. Yet I know that there are people who are who know the truth, but are trying to denounce this Holocaust, just like that, trying to say that President Biden didn't win the election. People will lie, and people will believe many, many lies. I would love to see people treating others with generosity, in peace, rather than with arguments, killing and fighting. Can we hope for that? If we all try very hard, we'll find that there is no difference among human beings. There are good ones and bad ones. There are more good ones than bad ones. Unfortunately, we always hear about the bad ones first. But if everyone tries to live their own life and treat others with fairness and in peace, rather than with knives and killing and fighting, we could achieve peace in this wonderful world of ours. I will leave a few minutes for questions and answers, and so I will end now and tell you I thank you very much. By the way, I have written a book called The Girl in a Cellar, a book which tells my story with pictures of my family, because I feel that once I'm gone, that no one will be able to speak for me except perhaps my book and my children. I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, as always, for sharing your story with us this afternoon and for teaching our community about the Holocaust on a regular basis. If anybody has any questions, please use the Q&A box on the Zoom screen. And while we're waiting for a couple of questions, I'll start with a few. You talked a little bit about your early life, and as you said, it was a wonderful life for a young, innocent girl. can you talk a little bit about just a favorite childhood memory with your parents before Nazi Germany invaded your city?
Well, I used to go on vacation with my mother. My daddy, unfortunately, went on vacation separately because he did not feel that he could leave his store unattended. So when he went on vacation, my mother would go to the store and be there. This is one mistake that I feel should not have been made. My parents should have gone on vacation together and closed the store for 2 weeks. But I loved going with my mother. We went skiing in the winter time. We went to the mountains during the summertime and had wonderful weeks of walking in the mountains, hiking, and going on the river. Those are wonderful, wonderful memories. I also remember memories of sitting down in my house in the afternoon doing my homework with my mother sitting at the table with me doing some kind of knitting or fixing or whatever while she watched me do the homework. My mother could be very strict and she could also help me a lot. She knew her mathematics. She even knew Latin. She could help me with Latin and French and Polish, of course. Sitting at the table with her gave me so much good feeling that she was there just for me and she was helping me, even though at times she would make me redo the paper because I didn't write neatly or learn some poems or whatever. I didn't know them by heart. But being with my mother was a most wonderful memory.
Thank you so much. And I like focusing on these memories of your parents and other people who did not survive the Holocaust because it's important for us as an audience listening to these stories to remember these were real people who existed and who lived a life tragically cut short, but your parents were people who you remember, and that's why I wanted you to share this with the audience, just something nice about them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ye-
Both my father and my mother were very generous. Before the war, they helped everyone. They helped poor people. And as you can see, during the war, my mother sacrificed her life to be with her nephew. Sadly, they both were killed, and my father never survived. But I heard after the war that he took a few other Jewish men from the ghetto to hide them with him outside when the ghetto was being liquidated. And because he was the only one who did not look Jewish, had to go out to get food outside while the other men were hidden, someone saw him on the street and pointed a finger at him. And he was reported to the police. And as a result, I never saw him. My daddy did tell me the last time I saw him in that office in the factory, when he told me he would go to Germany, he took out a little cyanide pill out of his belt pocket, showed it to me, and said, "This is the fastest acting poison. If I'm caught by the Nazis, I will not let them torture me. I will take that pill and swallow it." but I don't know what happened to my father. I hope he did not suffer.
Thank you for sharing. You talked about creating this workshop through Long Beach about Holocaust education. Is this still ongoing?
Yes, it is. It's been going on for 13 years. Every summer, some teachers have come back repeated times. I've speak to each group each year, including this year. They usually bring a very good history professors from other universities. The teachers are asked to read a book. This year, they read a book by Deborah Lipstadt, who was being uh, who, who is a professor and was being tried in court about the Holocaust denials. Naturally, she won her case, and the book she wrote was supposed to be read this summer during this particular workshop. They also have a one-day workshop during the year one time. Maybe they will have two even. And unfortunately, last 2 years, we could not meet at the university as they have done in previous years, but we do it on a Zoom. But there were over 55 teachers this summer attending the workshop.
Thank you very much. Can you please talk about coming to the United States and starting a family?
Well, as I mentioned, I came to Brooklyn first. I lived in Brooklyn for a few months. And then I got my nursing license. I worked at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital as an undergraduate until I got my license. I also had to get my high school diploma, which I did not finish in Poland. And in England, they did not demand that I have a high school diploma. They needed nurses very badly. So they took me in as I came in and accepted me into training. I did very well in England. I never failed any exams. And so when I came to America, I thought, surely I'll get my license 1, 2, 3. Nurses are needed. However, they weren't needed that badly. And eventually I got a job with Brooklyn Jewish Hospital as an undergraduate until I got my nursing license, which I did the year after. When I started working in Manhattan with my license in my hand, I was accepted in every hospital and they wanted me very badly. I met Harold, as I mentioned before, at Mount Sinai. And in 1955, we were married and we just celebrated our big anniversary in May of 2021, excuse me. We have 3 children. Our oldest daughter lives in LA and has 1 son. My son lives in Santa Monica and has 3 daughters, one of whom just graduated Berkeley. One is attending Chicago University, and the third one is in high school. My oldest daughter has a son who is at the university as well. My youngest daughter, Julia, lives with us, has been living with us since the COVID happened. She really has a place in Pasadena, works for KABC Eyewitness News. She's a producer, but she does it all from the house and also works in Orange County, where they have another office and it's closer to her. These are our three children, four grandchildren, and my husband just celebrated his 94th birthday last week. I'll be celebrating the same birthday this coming month, August. We've had a long, long life, full experiences, good and bad ones, but a full life. We have bad experiences, but we also had very good ones. And I'm very grateful to live in America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and Mazel Tov to both of you for the birthdays, the one last week and the upcoming one. What was it like to talk to your husband about your experiences during the Holocaust since he was born in the United States?
That's a good question because I dated a lot of young men and no one ever asked me about my past life except my husband. He was the one who wanted to know what happened, how it happened. When we finally got married, one year we were going to go skiing with a group of doctors from Long Beach to Switzerland. My husband suggested, instead of going for 2 weeks of skiing, let's go just for 1 week. Let's go to Poland for 1 week. I really didn't want to go back to Poland. My memories were so horrible. I didn't want to go. But I felt if he wanted to see the country where I lived during the war, I will go there. And so after skiing 1 week in Switzerland, we flew to Poland. I was very, very nervous. Poland at that time was under communist government. Even though it was a Polish government, it was communist, very strict. And there was a lot of people always reporting everybody who might have something against communism. Our week in Poland was very good at the time because we knew we were leaving Poland. Again, we didn't have to stay there. Harold and I, we went to Auschwitz. We went to my town, Przemysl. We went to Warsaw and Krakow. Going to Auschwitz was an amazing, horrible experience. Seeing the rooms where people were being choked with gas, places where bodies were being burned, seeing pictures of starved little children, naked, crying with tears in their eyes. And all I could think about was, what if one of those children was my child, or if I had been one of those children? It's beyond any amount of understanding. Later on, we've taken each of our children to Poland to see my town where I was born, but also to go to Auschwitz for them to see what the Holocaust meant in Poland. And this is something that everyone should visit and see, especially if they have any doubts about Holocaust happening.
Thank you so much for sharing this. And this was actually a question that somebody else had asked about whether or not you had been back to Przemysl. When you were there, did you interact with anybody who had known you? I don't know what year exactly this was, but I gather it was before the early 90s.
Now we went in early 70s. My mother owned a building, a small apartment building where I was born, where I lived all my childhood. My husband and I went there, walked up to one of the apartments and knocked on the door. People who lived there before the war were still living there. And when they opened the door and saw me, they were absolutely amazed. Gerda, they shouted, it's you. They hugged me and kissed me and invited us both for tea and cake and wanted to hear all about my experiences during the war. My poor husband sat there, not understanding a word they said, nor the word I answered. But we talked and talked in Polish the whole evening. I also met another couple of women who lived in another apartment, still living in that place after the war. Our apartment was occupied by two different families, and I knocked on the door, asked if I could come in, but the guy didn't want to let me in. So that happened in many cases when owners would come and visit their apartments, and people would actually not only not allow them to come in, but call them names or say, what, you're still alive? The German didn't manage to kill you. My experience with my neighbors was much nicer, much more pleasant. They had wonderful memories of me and my parents. My mother is the lady who owned the house. And so I must say that people I met were wonderful, the people who saw me after the war. However, there were many people who supposedly helped my parents to hide some of their uh, clothing or stuff from our apartment, like carpeting and so on. And I tried to get those things back. The people who hid it were the lady was head mistress of my high school, but she turned out to be a very um, cold and unpleasant woman. And I know she hid everything and she never gave me anything back because she didn't have to. But most people we met who knew us before the war were very nice to us, and we were very nice and helpful to them.
Thank you so much. One of somebody who was watching today commented and said, I wanted to say, I thank God for saving your life and for your testimony today. I will not forget it. Thank you for being strong enough to share. God bless you for teaching us to be better human beings.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do feel that if we can forget the color of the skin, the religion of each individual, that we can treat people like every human being as good as the next one, we can get along much better and have a much better world for all of us.
Thank you. And I was going to ask as well what you would like for people to take away from learning your story, but that sounds like that's that's a good conclusion for you. Is there anything else you would like to add for anybody who's listening today?
In Smithsonian Magazine in let's see, what year was that? It was about 3 years ago. A Smithsonian Magazine had a issue in which they talk about the new Anne Frank. And there are several pages about a girl who came from Poland, who wrote a diary, and eventually she's been called a new Anne Frank. This girl lived in our town. I knew her. And my cousin, the one who survived the war, was her boyfriend during the war. My cousin ended up being in a concentration camp, but sadly, she and my cousin's parents were hidden for a while in a building, and somebody reported them to the police as hidden, and the police came down to the building, searched for them, brought all three of them, my cousin's parents and his girlfriend, down to the street and shot them all. My cousin never forgot it, naturally. He found the diary. Now the diary is being translated into English and perhaps made into a movie. Her younger sister survived and lives in America. But I knew the young girl who dated my cousin, and it is a very sad story. My cousin, who did marry and had 2 children in America, he has never forgotten this girl nor his parents, the way they were murdered on the street. And that's another example of how people reported strangers. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know how good or bad human beings they were, but they were Jewish. And they were going to report them for nothing. They may have gotten some money for it. They may have gotten a bottle of liquor. They may have gotten a piece of bread. But is that what you do by reporting people to be killed? I still can't see it. But the Smithsonian has a wonderful article about it. And if you can get hold of it, it has a big title in front saying, "The Long Hidden Diary of a Young Polish Woman's Last Days, the New Anne Frank." I think it was, I can't see the date right now, but I think it's about 3 or 4 years old by now, the Smithsonian, but you can rent it in a library.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I think you left us with a really good message. These people who wanted to report you and others did
Yes.
so just for no reason at all.
Mhm.
And you share this story on such a regular basis. You speak to students a lot through our museum. So you are teaching young students about 14 to 16 years old about that and about the dangers of bigotry and Thank you so much on behalf of our museum for everything that you do for our community and for our future.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. And we hope everybody has a happy, healthy, and safe weekend ahead. And we look forward to slowly seeing everybody at the museum in person. Um, we are open at a limited capacity, but please come by and see us in person. But in the meantime, you can still follow our website to see our virtual programs that we will be continuing to hold. Of
Thank you, Michael, very much. And thank everybody for listening.
course.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much to you and to your family for helping set this up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I get muted now?
Yes, well,
Yeah. Stop video.